In today's chess video, we'll look at the top 10 traps in the Queen's Gambit. The most popular variations from here are the accepted line, the declined variation e6, the Slav defense c6, and the Albin counter gambit. We'll first look at 5 traps for black and then 5 for white. Let's begin with the most beautiful trap. We'll start with the Albin counter gambit. White takes and then d4. This is all standard stuff. Now here the most popular and probably the best move is knight f3. But the second most popular move, which quite a lot of people play, is e3. The idea is that this pawn is restricting white's movement of the knight, so he wants to get rid of it and e3 is the best option. But here's where you can start setting up your trap. First bishop b4 check. Blocking with the bishop is the most obvious response. And now we pick up this pawn on e3, enticing white to grab this free bishop. If he tries to be greedy and goes for it, then he is gone. Let me show you how. First pawn takes, it's a check. The king has to support his partner, so king e2. And look, now if you take the knight and promote to a queen, then white can simply exchange the queens first. It's a check, so you'll have to take back, and then he takes your other queen. If you look at it, the game is almost equal, but we want an advantage, a really big advantage. Therefore, in this position, the killer move is to take on g1, but promote to a knight and not a queen. Now this is a check, so white can't exchange the queens. So say for example, rook takes, then you have the bishop check, and it's goodbye to the queen. In this position, even if he plays king e1, you still have queen h4 check, and if king d2, then knight c6, you can activate the bishop, maybe even castle on the queen side, and just destroy the king. I want to go back to this position. Now here, even if he does not capture the bishop and instead takes the pawn, still you have queen h4 check, and then you can come to e4 and attack the rook. This is still a better position for black, so even if white doesn't fall for it, you'll still have an early advantage. Alright, now let's look at another cool trap in the Albin counter gambit. After white takes, pawn d4 and then knight f3 attacks the pawn. Knight c6 defends it, and now instead of e3, white can also think of developing the knight this way because this square is covered by the pawn. Then queen e7 is something I would go for, and here there are many ways in which white can go wrong. We are putting pressure on this e5 pawn and also looking to attack along this lovely diagonal. And if white is really concerned about this, then a3 is the move you will most often see. In which case you can capture this pawn and he captures your pawn. But that's a big blunder. It's curtains for white. Can you find the crushing move for black? Yes, it is knight to d3 and that's a stunning smothered checkmate. He just can't take with the pawn because it is pinned to the king. Moving on, now let's look at one of the most famous traps in the Queen's Gambit decline, which starts with e6, knight c3, knight f6, both sides are eyeing down the center, then bishop g5 pins the knight, and here you play this cunning little knight to d7. Now it might seem that after takes, white can easily capture this pawn because this knight is pinned to the queen, but that's a big blunder because you can actually take the knight. And if bishop takes queen, you first play bishop b4 check. The king has nowhere to go, so the queen has to sacrifice herself for her love. And ultimately, after all the dust has settled, you end up with an extra piece, which is almost a 3-point advantage. We call this the elephant trap. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Similar to the previous variation, after the knight moves here, white might not fall for the elephant trap, and he might continue with a natural move like e3. Here you'll play c6, which is kind of similar to a reverse London setup. Knight f3 is again a standard response, and now you will play kind of a tricky move, queen to a5. We call this the Cambridge Springs defense. If white continues with the standard development of bishop d3 preparing to castle, then you can respond with d takes on c4. If he recaptures, then knight e4 puts a lot of pressure on this knight and at the same time attacks the bishop. It is very easy for white to focus all his attention on this knight, so many players play queen c2 adding a defender and at the same time attacking the knight. But they miss the fact that after takes, you have this sneaky little queen which can gobble up the knight. I can't even tell you how many people fall for this. Anyway, going back, the best move here for white is actually bishop h4. So takes, then we have a queen check, and then white has to block with the knight to protect his bishop. But even if white plays this correctly, you're still up a pawn with some potential attacks along the queen side. Actually, there's one more beautiful line in the Cambridge Springs that I want to show you. Here, instead of taking this pawn, if you straight away play knight e4, then after bishop takes, pawn takes. Now since both these pieces are under attack, white can go knight e5. And here if you decide to take, white will obviously recapture. And now many of you might straight away just go after this free pawn. But that's a big blunder because white has this stunning move, queen to d8, and that's a brutal checkmate. So be careful about this knight e4 variation. Anyway, let's move on to our next trap. This time, after we decline with e6, knight c3, and here we go for c5, the Tarrasch defense. We both capture towards the center. This is the Skara Gambit, and then white takes on d4, also defending this pawn. Now here we'll play knight c6. He can't take because the queen is hanging, so he goes back to d1. Pawn takes, queen takes. We won't exchange. Let's play bishop e6. After he takes, we get our rook on this open file, and it's all good till here. But here, if white is not careful and plays some random move like a3, you have the absolutely killer move, knight to d4, threatening not only a check, but that's actually a mate. There's no easy way for him to defend. Even if he tries to make some space for the king, you can still give a check and gobble up the rook. Going back, in this position, even a natural looking move like knight f3 gets him into trouble after you play knight to b4. Alright, I have 5 more traps to show you. But before that, I would like to thank Blinkist for sponsoring this video. Blinkist is a wonderful online platform which presents the important ideas from books and podcasts in a condensed form. It has an enormous library of over 5,000 titles in 27 categories, and they are all summarized into 15-minute capsules of information called blinks. These blinks are available in both audio as well as text formats. I've been using this app for a few months now, and I've learned some useful practical ideas to improve my productivity. One book I really enjoyed listening to was Atomic Habits. It is power-packed with helpful nuggets to literally hack your brain into changing your habits. Like the 2-minute rule, which says you just need to trick your brain into starting the activity to make it a habit. So if you want to start studying, make sure you at least open the book or just read one paragraph every day. And if you make this a habit, you will most likely end up reading a few pages once you've started. That's such a great hack. Blinkist has many other great titles like Ikigai, Mind Over Money, and even Gary Kasparov's Deep Thinking. So if you're not into reading or don't get time to read, with Blinkist you can still learn and get inspired by the best non-fiction books quickly and easily. Right now, Blinkist is offering a 7-day free trial and a special 25% discount for all Chess Talk viewers. Just click the link in the description and you're all set to start your learning journey. Alright, now let's look at some traps for white. This is the Queen's Gambit, and now let's see what happens if black accepts this pawn. e3, and we are ready to take it back with the bishop. Ideally, black should just forget about this pawn and focus on his development, but if he is desperate to hold on to this pawn advantage, then he can try b5. We have a4 attacking the defender. Now there are a couple of ways he can defend this pawn. a6 doesn't work obviously because after takes you simply capture the rook. Now what if he plays bishop d7 in this position? Well then takes, and now you can play knight c3 attacking the bishop. If he goes back, then you might think black looks fine because bishop is defending the pawn and this knight is defending the bishop. But white is just crushing it. Can you find the winning move for white? Yes, it's queen f3. Now he can't move his knight because then the bishop is hanging, so c6 is the only option. But now the knight is overloaded, so we can play the killer move, rook takes bishop. And look at this, knight takes and then it's a check. Believe it or not, queen d7 is the only legal move. We take the rook, again blocking with the queen is the only option. So we come back and this time we pick up this horsey as well. We've just wiped off the entire queen side in the last 3 moves. This is clearly winning for white. Let's go back. Now in this position, if he defends with c6, then it's the same idea. Takes, and again queen f3 attacks the rook and you ultimately pick up the knight or the bishop. Now in the Queen's Gambit accepted line, let's see what happens if he's smart enough and he just develops naturally. Knight f6, bishop takes, and then many black players want to fianchetto their bishop and castle on the king side. So g6, and here you play knight f3. Now when he plays bishop g7, you play this amazing move, queen a4 check. Now there are a variety of ways in which he can block this check and almost all of them get him into trouble apart from one. But let's start with the most common moves. I'm sure many of you are thinking of bishop d7, very natural, attacking the queen. But then queen b3 attacks 2 birds with 1 stone. Even if he castles, you can put serious pressure on the king side with knight e5. Anyway, so bishop d7, not that good. Now what if he plays knight to c6? Well then again you have knight e5 attacking the knight and attacking this f7 pawn. If he castles, you just trade off the knights and you end up with a free pawn. And here if he defends with the bishop, then you simply fork the queen and the rook. Okay, let's go back. What else? What if he plays this knight to d7? Well then you have the stunning bishop sacrifice. And after king takes, then you go knight g5 check. If king e8, then this sweetie is trapped, just like this. If king f8, again it's a beautiful fork and the queen is gone. And if king g8, then we have a mate in 4. Can you find it? Here we go. We start with queen c4 check. f8 is the only safe square for the king and the threat is queen f7 mate. Therefore he blocks, we take, he blocks again and we smash him right in the face with a beautiful checkmate. Alright, now what if he blocks with this knight? Well then again you have the bishop sacrifice and again knight g5 check. If he goes back you have the same ideas as we saw earlier. Even though now he also has this option of playing king f6, he's already in big trouble because the king is out in the open, so just go after him and finish him off. The engine gives white a massive 6-point advantage. Okay, let's go back. How else can he block the check? Queen d7? Well then again you have the bishop check. If king takes, then you have this stunning check with the knight, forking the couple. So basically he will have to move his king to d8 or f8, in which case he loses his right to castle, and you can simply play bishop b3 or even queen b3 and you should be good to go. Alright, now the only move which probably looks okay for black is c6. Although there are no clear-cut traps here, but still this is completely fine for white and that's the good thing about this trap. Basically there are many ways in which black can go wrong and unless he plays perfectly, you will most probably end up with a solid advantage. Alright, moving on to our next trap for white. Let's check out some variations where he declines the gambit with c6. This is the Slav defense. After a few natural development moves, we reach this position and then finally we exchange the pawns. And now that this central pawn is kind of isolated, that's when you play queen b3. The point is that you're attacking both these pawns, therefore black needs to do something about this. Two of the most popular responses are queen b6 and pawn to b6, but both of them are not that great. By the way, can you find the best move for black in this position? Well, believe it or not, the best move actually is to go back with the bishop, which of course does not look that great, but that's the best black can do. Anyway, let's look at the popular responses. If queen b6, then don't exchange the queens, instead just capture this pawn first. And if he takes the knight, you can take back with the queen. And if he takes the queen, then don't take back immediately because then this knight is hanging. Therefore first knight f6 check and in between move and only after that you take the queen. Going back, in this position, the second most popular response by black is b6. And can you find the crushing move here? Well, the best move is pawn to e4. You open up this diagonal for the bishop and now the plan is to harass the black army from both sides. So for example, if pawn takes, you go knight e5 to threaten a checkmate. e6 and bishop e6 are black's only defenses. And in any case, you will just play bishop b5 check. He'll have to block with any of these knights and then you can play something like bishop g5. Both these knights are kind of handicapped because they are pinned and yet they have to protect each other. Eventually both these knights will fall and then you can continue your assault on the king. After e4 here, even if he captures with the knight or the bishop, it's still the same thing. After the exchanges, again we are threatening in the same way. And this is a variation where he captures with the bishop. First you give a check, then you exchange and ultimately you pin both the knights. Moral of the story is that in the Slav defense, if black develops this bishop, which most probably he will, then you can literally finish him off in the opening itself. Okay, now let's look at another trap in the Queen's Gambit declined. So d4, d5, c4, and here black goes for the most common response, e6. In this game, you'll see a series of natural development moves like knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, pinning the knight, bishop e7, breaking the pin, e3, opening up this diagonal for the bishop, black castles, we develop the other knight, knight b to d7, then we eliminate the central pawn, black takes back and we activate the bishop. Black gets his rook on this semi-open file and we do the same. Then c6 from black, he solidifies the center and prevents the knight from jumping into b5. Now this is a very common setup in the Queen's Gambit and there could be different move orders to reach this position. Now here's where you set the trap. First let's castle, and now one of the most common moves black plays is h6. He's attacking the bishop and also making some room for the king. So we go back and here many players are looking to get rid of the bishop pair and for that they play knight h5 trying to exchange their knight for the bishop. But that's a mistake. Can you find the best move for white? Well, the brilliant move is knight takes on d5. He can't even think of taking the knight because bishop c7 and the queen is trapped. Therefore, taking the knight is not a good option. And even if he takes the bishop, you simply take back with the knight and your upper central pawn, which is quite a healthy advantage. Alright, let's check out our next trap. In this game, we look at the Albin counter gambit. The main line goes as follows. D takes on e5, pawn to d4, knight f3 attacks the pawn, knight c6 adds a defender, g3 planning to fianchetto the bishop, bishop g4 attacking the knight, also indirectly attacking this pawn, Bishop g2, then queen d7 is the main move with the idea of exchanging the bishops. Now here castling would seem like a very obvious move, but if you want to surprise your opponent, you can go for h3. Now here many black players get confused and they are not sure how to respond. Going back would seem just a waste of a move, therefore taking the knight is the best option. Also this exchange provides black the opportunity to now pick up this free pawn. But the problem is that if he takes, then you can capture on b7. Therefore a very natural move for black is to castle on the queen side, defend this pawn with the king and also activate the rook along this semi-open file. But guess what? Black has fallen into your trap. Can you find the winning move here? Well, the crushing move is bishop to g4, pinning the queen. But hold on, what if he blocks with f5? Will you take with the bishop? Well, that doesn't work because black can simply take with the queen. So what do? Yes, you'll capture this pawn en passant and again we reactivate the pin and this time there's no way for the queen to escape. Alright, so it's puzzle time. In this position, it is white's turn and you need to find the winning move for white. Do share your answers in the comment section below. Guys, don't forget to like and subscribe and do check out Blinkist. Link